On the surface, Hollywood looks like the perfect place where dreams come true. It's filled with beautiful people who seem to become extremely famous, rich, and successful practically overnight. But sometimes, underneath the perfect veneer, there can be a rotten core. When we look for representation of this dynamic, there's no better example than the WB network. While only a network for just over a decade, the WB still managed to create some of the most successful and impactful television shows for teens and young adults, although many of their shows appealed to nearly everyone. The WB's blueprint lives on today, as when the network shut down, it partnered with UPN to launch the CW. On the surface, being cast on a WB show looked like winning the lottery. Most of the beautiful young actors they cast were completely unknown, and then suddenly they were extremely famous with passionate fans, working one of the most desired jobs on the planet and being paid tens and even hundreds of thousands of dollars per week to do it. But like many things in Hollywood, things were not as they seemed on the WB TV show sets. While the WB was able to keep a lot of what happened on their sets and with their cast from getting out back in the 90s and early 2000s, that's not the case today. Over recent years, some of the biggest stars from their most successful shows have spoken out. Shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, Angel, Smallville, One Tree Hill, Dawson's Creek, Seventh Heaven, and more. Additionally, a concerning amount of former WB stars have gone on to extremely dark, disturbing, and criminal behavior, involving multiple cults, arrests, abuse, sexual assault, violence, exploiting their fans, and so much more. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Not only what happened behind the scenes on the sets of these generation-defining TV shows, but also the horrendous scandals, controversies, and criminal behavior of so many of their former stars. I'll also be including some information that, to my understanding, has never been disclosed and discussed publicly, provided by sources with intimate ties to both the WB stars and behind the scenes. So sit back, relax, grab a drink and a snack, and let's turn the clock back to the late 90s and early 2000s and the dark world of the WB network. Seventh Heaven was one of the first shows to be significantly successful on the WB, with its first season airing during the WB's sophomore year in 1996 and finishing its 10th season during the WB's final year of 2006. It did air its 11th and final season on the newly created CW. Due to the fact the show had moderate success and aired for over a decade, it did eventually become the WB's most watched TV series, peaking at 12.5 million live viewers tuning in for an episode during the third season in February 1999. Set in the fictional town of Glen Oaks, California, Seventh Heaven focused on Reverend Eric Camden and his wife Annie. Eric was a minister, and he and Annie had 7 children, hence the title Seventh Heaven. The show starred Stephen Collins and Catherine Hicks as Eric and Annie Camden, and when the show began, they had 5 children who were played by Jessica Biel, Beverly Mitchell, Mackenzie Rossman, David Gallagher, and Barry Watson. During the aforementioned most watched episode in the third season, titled In Praise of Women, Eric and Annie had twins that were their 6th and 7th child. While Seventh Heaven was being filmed and airing on the WB, there was nothing too out of the ordinary going on behind the scenes. The usual ups and downs of TV shows, and certain issues like young actors growing up and wanting to leave the show and go on to other projects. Like many of the WB shows we'll discuss today, the scandals and horrendous behavior attached to Seventh Heaven was not made public until several years after the show had finished airing. The show was mainly based around Reverend Eric Camden, played by Stephen Collins. Collins was an actor with a long and successful career in Hollywood and appeared on television for the first time in 1974, working steadily over the next 20 years on shows like Charlie's Angels and Tale of the Gold Monkey. He also appeared in many films like The First Wives Club and Star Trek. After his 11 years starring on Seventh Heaven from 1996 until 2007, Collins continued working in hit shows like The Office, where he played Andy Bernard's dad, and multiple episode arcs on shows like Falling Skies, Private Practice, Law & Order SVU, It's Only Sunny in Philadelphia, and the 2014 Marvel animated series Avengers Assemble. In 2012, after 30 years of marriage, Collins was going through a separation from his then wife, actress Faye Grant, and the couple attempted marriage counseling and therapy before proceeding with this divorce in 2014. Keep the therapy in mind, as we will circle back to it in just a minute. 10 years prior to when they were going through therapy and couples counseling, Faye had received a letter in the mail from someone who had had an incident with Stephen decades ago. And this woman had had an incident with Stephen when she was a child between the ages of 10 and 13. There were 3 separate incidents. And the woman detailed in the letter how Stephen had exposed himself to her several times when she was 10, 11, 12, and 13, and how he had taken her hand and made her touch him inappropriately. The woman wrote to Faye after she had seen Stephen on Seventh Heaven, and he was purporting himself to be this, very wonderful guy and, doing all these charity things and being associated with this religious show that places like the Parents Council used to really stand behind and say it was a wholesome family drama with a wholesome cast. And when Faye received this letter, she had brought it up to Stephen, and he ended up spinning her this story about how he was wearing these cut-off denim shorts with holes in them, as was the fashion back then. And he said he had accidentally moved in a certain way, and he had accidentally exposed himself through one of the holes in his jeans and tried to just brush it off with that. Faye obviously had been married to him for decades and believed her husband that he wouldn't have done this awful thing. So she let it go, didn't reply, didn't say anything. And then when they were going through all of their difficulties and couples counseling, Faye did actually 10 years later reply to this letter. And the woman and her ended up having correspondence over email. And she went into more detail explaining how this, wasn't just, oh, I accidentally, exposed myself through a hole in my jeans. And so then Faye brought this up in therapy, and Stephen confessed to her. And unbeknownst to him at the time, Faye was actually recording what Stephen was saying in the therapy session. Obviously, Faye was completely horrified, and Stephen also spoke about other incidents that she wasn't aware of with other girls and other children. And Faye ended up recording this part of the conversation too, and I will play some clips for you here. It is not obviously amazing audio quality because she had like the recording device in her pocket, but you can make out what they're saying and everything, but just be aware it's not the greatest quality.
Exposed yourself to this 10-year-old sister. Did you have an erection?
I mean,
Partial erection? Yes. How did you talk to her? What kind of things did you say?
The exposure happened a couple of times.
A couple of times? You told me once.
No, I said on the list it happened several times. I said on the exposure.
Several times? Oh, you have to understand I was being shot in the face with a shotgun. So several times.
It happened.
With a 10-year-old. Okay.
Well, no, she was 11 and then like 12 and 13.
10, 11, 12, around several years.
I think that there were like 3 incidents over about 3 years.
So as you heard, Stephen admitted to what this woman details in the letter, and he also admitted to other children that he had exposed himself to, and these all took place between 1974 and 1993, and obviously Faye was completely horrified. And also one thing is, you'll notice this in the audio clips, and there's an interview I'll play you in a second, where Stephen tries to call these girls and children young women to try and age them up, I guess, but all of his victims were children, like 10, 11, 12, 13, very, very young. And when Faye got this recording, she gave it to the authorities and they started an investigation into Stephen Collins. But obviously, it had been so long that the statute of limitations didn't allow the LAPD to prosecute him. So after these clips came out, obviously everybody was aware of his horrendous acts to children, and he tried one last ditch effort to kind of retain his career, and he sought out an interview with Katie Couric and basically did a tell-all about what he had done. And the interview, I'm going to play clips of it. Also, keep in mind that he absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, has hired PR, crisis management for something like this. I think in general, people kind of overestimate how much PR is involved and hired, but something like this, like a mainstream actor that was on a TV show that was on for 11 years, he definitely hired PR, and they will have told him how to speak, what words to use, what to wear, how to sit, how to gesture and gesticulate, and all these things. Like every single movement and word out of his mouth absolutely went through an approval board from a PR crisis team.
And she and I were watching TV alone together, and I exposed myself, took her hand and moved it in such a way that she was touching me.
So he just tried to use this interview to cling on to any sort of acting career that he could maintain, but obviously people were not buying it.
I am not attracted to underage girls. Keep in mind that the only time there was any physical contact with an underage girl was in 1973. The incident in 1982, God help me, took advantage. That's not the right word, but I acted impulsively.
I think taking advantage may be
maybe it is exactly the right word.
Again, he also tried to do an interview with People magazine, and I just don't think there's anything you can do or say that people, especially like mainstream audiences, are going to forgive something like this, because it is, in my opinion, like the most awful thing you can do, because you are destroying not only the child's innocence, but that is going to affect them for the rest of their life. And it's just such an unspeakable thing. At the time the scandal broke, Collins was fired from a movie he was working on where he was playing a priest who was also harming children. And also all networks that were playing Seventh Heaven reruns or had plans to play Seventh Heaven reruns ended up suspending them for the foreseeable future. Also, this has affected the longevity and syndication rights of Seventh Heaven in the same way that I spoke about this in my Danny Masterson video, and the That 70s Show syndication rights and sales. They are still available, these shows, on smaller streaming networks, but it's why you won't ever see them on big streaming platforms like Netflix, because they don't want to touch the syndication rights for these shows, because they would be paying out millions of dollars to people like Stephen Collins and Danny Masterson. Of course, he was also dropped by his manager and talent agency, and he was on the Screen Actors Guild board, and he had to resign from that as well. He actually was found by the Daily Mail in 2019, and this is kind of the last real update that I could find about him that there was pictures and like a marriage certificate and evidence for. He apparently now lives in a small town in Iowa, and he married a woman who was in her like late 20s, and she was from Germany, and she was actually like a super mega fan of him and Seventh Heaven. And if you look back on her social media, there's posts like in the late 90s and early 2000s of her posting pictures and screenshots from Seventh Heaven and saying how much she loved him and wanted a relationship like his character and the character's wife had. He married her, and they've just been living in Iowa. He's never tried to come back to acting or anything like that. I'm sure he still has plenty of money, given that he was a successful actor for so long. And obviously Seventh Heaven, doing 11 seasons of that Those seasons are like big 20 plus episode seasons that he's getting paid each episode. He will have money that will last him the rest of his life. And of course, he'll still be getting residual checks for reruns and syndications of not only Seventh Heaven, where it does air, but also all of the other projects that he worked on. So yes, I'm interjecting before this chapter even starts. But basically, what happened was, sorry, she needed some treats. While I was making this video, I was put in touch with some additional sources. You had your fill, my dear. I had a number of sources come forward about a cast member from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And the stuff that these people told me is absolutely wild. There is a lot of stuff out there publicly about this person, but the vast majority of the stuff they told me is not out there. And this stuff goes back to Buffy, like when they were filming it. Lead Buffy stars sleeping with other lead Buffy stars, people having all of these altercations, fights between lead Buffy stars and lead Buffy stars that had to be separated by Joshua Jackson at a WB promotion event. There's a lot, and there's a lot of dark stuff about this person too, and it's important to talk about it, and you will understand why when we talk about it in the last chapter. So because I was almost done, you might see that the last chapter is like a different feeling to the rest of the video. So we're going to see now the original Buffy chapter that is about someone else highly involved with the show. Then there's a Charm chapter, a Smallville chapter, and then it's the final chapter about another Buffy person. So just keep in mind that these people came forward. Most of them want to remain anonymous, but know that I've seen pictures, videos, emails, texts, and one of them I spent 6 hours on FaceTime with, where they also showed me around their house the damage that had been done by this person and just other things that added up and related to everything that they were telling me and all the information about this person. So enjoy watching Buffy Part 1, Charmed, Smallville, and Buffy Part 2. Sorry it's all chopped up, but the last chapter is a lot. In March 1997, the WB was looking for a mid-season replacement for the failed show Savannah. They decided to take a chance and greenlit the Sarah Michelle Gellar-led series Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The odds were stacked against Buffy, and despite it all, the show not only went on to great success, but along with Dawson's Creek, became the defining show of the WB. Buffy went on to develop a cult following that is still popular with audiences today, bringing in new viewers over 27 years after the show premiered. The show was created by Joss Whedon, who was born Joseph Whedon, but changed his name while he was in college, as apparently Joss means luck. Whedon actually was born lucky because he was born a Nepo baby, with both his father and grandfather being successful television writers, working on shows like The Dick Van Dyke Show and Golden Girls, both winning Emmys for their writing. In 1989, with his family connections and after graduating college, Whedon went straight to work on one of the most successful shows on television at the time, Roseanne. In 1992, Whedon wrote a movie, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, starring 90s A-listers Kristy Swanson and Luke Perry. There was a lot of interference with Whedon's original script, and the film flopped at the box office. When Whedon was given the chance to revisit Buffy with a TV series, the movie's premise and title were really the only things that were retained. One interesting side note for the movie Buffy the Vampire Slayer is it was the first film role for Ben Affleck and one of David Arquette and Hilary Swank's first role. There also was a guest appearance by 90s daytime icon Ricki Lake. Future Buffy TV show star Seth Green also had a small part in the Buffy movie, although the majority of his scenes were cut from the theatrical release. He does appear for about 3 seconds, making him the only person to appear in both the Buffy film and TV show. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is set in the fictional California town of Sunnydale, and in the first 3 seasons, the characters deal with the horrors of high school. In the 4th season, the cast moves to college, and the later 3 seasons depict early adulthood. While Buffy was about vampires and demons, the show deeply resonated with young audiences due to the show's writers using the fictional vampires and demons to represent the real-life struggles of teens and young adults. After the third season, Buffy's love interest Angel was spun off to create his own TV show, unsurprisingly titled Angel. The Angel spin-off also became a huge success for the WB, running for 5 seasons until 2004, which was 1 year after Buffy wrapped its 7th season in 2003. Buffy especially spoke to young girls and women who were thrilled to have representation of such a powerful female character played by the fantastic Sarah Michelle Gellar. And Whedon was also lauded as a feminist and given a lot of praise for how he had made such a female-driven show that went on to be so successful. And people were really happy to have representation that in the 90s and the early 2000s wasn't the greatest for young women on television. But unfortunately, things were not as they seemed with Whedon and on the set of Buffy, because many cast members over the past 3 years have come out and spoken about how Whedon was actually bullying female cast members, exploiting young actresses on his shows, being verbally abusive, and creating an extremely toxic and hostile work environment. After Whedon's success with Buffy and Angel, he went on to create other shows that, while they didn't have the longevity of Buffy and Angel, they did develop the same sort of cult following and success with audiences. There was Firefly and also Dollhouse, and then he moved into movies with Cabin in the Woods coming out in 2011 to rave reviews. And in 2012, Whedon helmed his biggest project to date and one of the biggest projects ever in cinema, Marvel's Avengers. When Avengers came out, I was in grad school and I was working as a general manager at AMC Theaters in Tampa. And I was at like the West Shore, the Veterans, the Woodlands locations. And I cannot tell you what it was like the week that Avengers came out. I've never seen anything like it. It was basically at least 2 weeks straight of sold out shows. I remember I actually screened it for like all my staff the like week before it actually came out so that they could all get a chance to see it, and we got, you know, like food and stuff in for them. And it was like every day we had to do like a rallying, you know, we got to get through this. Whedon's shows had made him extremely popular, but with the release of Avengers, absolutely shot him to like god status, and everybody was talking about Whedon and Avengers and how successful it was. With the success of Avengers, it was obviously a no-brainer for Marvel to have Whedon helm the sequel to Avengers, and in 2015, Age of Ultron came out, and obviously it was also a really big success, huge box office numbers, made millions and millions of dollars. A lot of people liked it. It didn't quite hit the same sort of rave reviews from audience and critics as the first Avengers, but it was still incredibly successful. After seeing Marvel's success with a group team-up movie, DC Comics rushed to produce Justice League. They originally hired Zack Snyder, and he was close to finishing the project when he suffered a family tragedy and unfortunately, and justifiably so, stepped away from the project. And at that stage, DC Comics went to Whedon and asked him to finish the film. But instead of finishing the film, Whedon decided to basically completely rewrite and reshoot about 75% of the film. And what ended up in cinemas was very, very far removed from both what audiences wanted, what DC expected, and what the original actors and producers and everybody had signed up for. The 2017 release of Justice League really was when you can pinpoint the downfall of Whedon, because the movie was like absolutely panned by critics. It underperformed majorly at the box office. Audiences hated it. The cast weren't really fans of it. There was really nobody who was a fan of it. And in the summer of 2020, one of the stars, Ray Fisher, ended up speaking out about his time on the film and his experience with Whedon. Fisher tweeted about Whedon calling him gross, abusive, unprofessional, and completely unacceptable. Warner Media conducted an investigation into Whedon's behavior on the set of Justice League and said that remedial action was taken as a result of the investigation, but they did not elaborate further. Jason Momoa also spoke out in support of Fisher and said that the cast and crew were treated terribly by Whedon and things needed to be investigated. Other sources who worked on the film claimed that the biggest clash on the set of Justice League came when Whedon pushed Gal Gadot, who played Wonder Woman, to record lines she didn't like. Whedon threatened to harm Gadot's career and disparaged Wonder Woman director Patty Jenkins. Multiple other sources claim Whedon was bragging that he had had it out with Gal. He told her he's the writer and she's going to shut up and say the lines and he can make her look incredibly stupid in the movie. Gal Gadot spoke out in support of Fisher and confirmed she had her own issues with Whedon. After a lot of the stars of Justice League spoke out about Whedon, they gained support from Charisma Carpenter, who tweeted her support for Ray Fisher and explained her own issues with Whedon that she had experienced on the set of Buffy and on Angel. Carpenter tweeted out her experience with Whedon, stating that Whedon had a history of creating toxic and hostile work environments, and she spoke about how Whedon treated her terribly, and upon learning that she was pregnant during the 4th season of Angel, asked her if she was going to keep it, and Carpenter alleged Whedon wanted to punish her for getting pregnant without his approval and wrote her character a bizarre storyline which culminated in her being killed off the show. I will add an anecdote here too. As an enormous Buffy fan, that I even have a tattoo of Buffy, and a big Angel fan, I put pictures and things too. Like, I've met all the cast like many, many times, and I have like worked with people who worked on the show too. And I remember when everything was happening with Charisma Carpenter in the 4th season, and I remember first people like having this weird reaction because the storyline was so bizarre and nobody knew why she was like being pushed out of the show in this weird way. And it was really like they completely ruined the character after 6-7 years of building her up and everything. And then after she was put in this coma, if you haven't watched Buffy and Angel, this bit might sound weird when I explain the storyline, but she was put in a coma, and I remember hearing stuff then that was like, oh, she doesn't want to leave the show, because a lot of people assume she's pregnant and she might want to leave to have the baby or to be at home when the baby's growing up. But I remember hearing from people like, no, she doesn't want to leave. This isn't her choice. And then she was put in a coma at the end of the 4th season, and they only brought her back for 1 episode during the 5th season. And I even remember then hearing like odd stuff that was going on, and everybody was so confused as to why they were doing this and why they were pushing her out of the show. So that's anecdotal evidence, but it does make sense with what she's saying. And of course, if it was just her alone saying these things, that's one thing. But after Charisma tweeted her support and told her story about Whedon, every single other lead actress from Buffy, with the exception of Allison Hannigan, who is incredibly close friends with Whedon, and so is her husband, who she met on the set of Buffy, Alexis Denisof. Everyone else spoke out and said they supported Charisma Carpenter and Ray Fisher, and detailed some of their own experience with Whedon. Amber Benson, who played Tara, supported Carpenter and called Buffy a toxic environment. Michelle Trachtenberg, who was only a very young teenager when she was on the show, spoke out about how there was a rule on the Buffy set that Joss Whedon was not allowed to be alone with her after a previous incident. Emma Caulfield, who played Anya, said, "Well, that's out finally. I don't know why it took people so long to have an understanding that this person who fanboys put on a pedestal and think can do no wrong finally got dethroned. Of course, the most devastating blow to Whedon was delivered by Buffy herself, with Sarah Michelle Gellar putting out probably one of the most perfect responses to any sort of situation like this ever, because not only did she absolutely confirm what everyone else was saying in a few words, basically, but she also said, "Do not bother me with this stuff. I do not want to talk about this man, and I do not want to be involved in drama." Sarah Michelle Gellar's statement read, "While I am proud to have my name associated with Buffy Summers forever, I do not want to be forever associated with the name Joss Whedon. I stand with all survivors of abuse and am proud of them for speaking out." Gellar declined to elaborate or deliver any further statements on Whedon. After the Buffy, Angel, and Justice League cast and others spoke out about Whedon, Whedon apparently removed himself from his new HBO series, The Nevers, and he has not done any projects since. He did attempt a sort of interview comeback, or kind of like Stephen Collins, to try and salvage some semblance of their career. He did an interview with Vulture, but just like Collins, people weren't buying it. Whedon got even further backlash and has not developed any projects since all of this came out. The WB initially focused on a wider young audience, but after the surprise success of the aforementioned Buffy the Vampire Slayer in 1997, they chose to aim the majority of their shows at the 12 to 30 demographic, especially the underrepresented in the media female audience. In January 1998, the WB released the show that, along with Buffy, is arguably their most famous and impactful, Dawson's Creek. 9 months later, in October 1998, the network again aimed its sights on the teen girl and young women demographic and released Charmed. The Charmed premiere was an enormous success, breaking the WB's record for the network's highest rated debut episode, and after airing only 2 episodes, the show was picked up for a 22-episode first season. Charmed gained a cult following and ran for 8 seasons that consisted of 178 episodes, making it not only the WB's second longest running drama behind Seventh Heaven, but in 2006, during its 8th and final season, Charmed became the longest running hour-long television series featuring all female leads. Despite these and numerous other accolades, there's one thing that Charmed is very well known for, and that is drama, especially between the cast. And this, unfortunately, started even before Charmed premiered and continues to this very day, 18 years since the show ended and 26 years since the show began. Charmed was produced by Brad Kern, E. Duke Vinson, and Beverly Hills 90210's Aaron Spelling. Aaron Spelling's company, Spelling Television, was also the production company behind the show, and when the cast and information was announced for Charmed, many people were very surprised to see that Shannen Doherty was cast in one of the 3 lead roles. Doherty had previously starred on Spelling's Beverly Hills 90210 and had left the show due to reported issues with co-star Jenny Garth. Interestingly, only 4 years later, Garth went on to star on a WB show also, What I Like About You, in 2002, a show created by infamous Nickelodeon producer Dan Schneider. After Shannen was fired from Beverly Hills 90210, she was quite vilified in the media and given the difficult label that is only ever assigned to actresses. Sarah Michelle Gellar has also been labeled that quite a lot, and in her case, it was only because she was ever standing up for the cast and the crew and wouldn't back down to Joss Whedon. So I don't really put too much stock in that label. And as I've mentioned, like throughout this video, I've met a lot of these people, and also I've worked with people or know people or friends with people who've worked with a lot of them too. And when it comes to like crew members and people who've spent time with Shannen Doherty, I've heard nothing but nice things about her. And I know people that she's really gone out of her way to be kind to, and she bakes crew members cookies and she has like parties and invites everyone, and I've heard nothing but nice things about her. So to jump to when Charmed is being cast, Aaron Spelling obviously is producing the show as well as his company Spelling Television, and Shannen actually wasn't going to audition for this because Aaron Spelling was putting it together. And it was Holly Marie Combs who, when getting into her car one day, saw the script and asked Shannen about it. And Shannen was like, oh, it's a spelling project. So Holly convinced her to go in and read for it. The network ended up being super enthusiastic about Shannen because she was a big star. And the network knew they could really capitalize on Aaron Spelling and Shannen Doherty working together again. So Shannen also got Holly to audition, and the network didn't want to hire Holly for the show. It was actually Shannen who went and fought for Holly and said, if I'm going to do this show, I want her to be one of the other lead characters. So the network went ahead with Shannen's suggestion. They cast Holly, they cast Shannen, and they also cast Lori Rom, who was to play the third sister. So the three sisters, Shannen plays Prue Halliwell, Piper is played by Holly Marie Combs, and Phoebe was being played by Lori Rom. They shot the pilot, everything was fine, and then Lori Rom ended up saying she didn't want to play the character anymore because she didn't want to play a witch for religious reasons. The unaired pilot with Lori Rom, which I'll show some clips of here, is actually on YouTube. I'll link it in my sources so that you can go and see it if you want to. So after Lori backed out of the project, the network were the ones that were really enthusiastic about Alyssa Milano, and they ended up hiring her, and they had to reshoot all of Phoebe's scenes in the pilot, obviously. And once they did all that, they were good to go. The show went on the WB, broke records the first day, as I mentioned earlier, and was greenlit. The first season went well. Charmed was a huge hit. Everyone was happy. And then come the second season, everything changed and there started to be a lot of issues on the set. A lot of teen, young adult shows and movies do have this kind of pitting characters against each other, and Charmed was no exception. It was a bit of a Shannen Alyssa verse thing, and in the same way that like you even see it with Edward and Jacob and Dawson and Pacey and Angel and Spike, it was, oh, which character do you like? And that does sometimes turn into an actress versus an actress or an actor versus an actor. And also because there was a lot of media attention around the show because it was successful, it was kind of the actresses keeping tally of, oh, she got an interview but I didn't, and oh, I got 10 scenes this episode and she only got 5. And apparently Alyssa was feeling a little bit knocked down because Shannen was the number one on the call sheet. She was the lead of the show and she was making the most money. And it was Shannen that really sold the show. The network, when they were publicizing it, it was Shannen Doherty, because she was the bigger name.
The WB presents Shannen Doherty, Holly Marie Combs, and Alyssa Milano in the series premiere, Charmed. Followed by a new series, Shannen Doherty, Alyssa Milano, Charmed. Shannen Doherty, Holly Marie Combs, and Alyssa Milano. Charmed premieres tonight after Dawson's Creek on the WB.
I know number one on the call sheet probably sounds like a silly little thing. In case you don't know, basically whenever you're shooting, they will list everyone that's going to be on set or in these scenes and stuff, and normally the person who is the most famous, the biggest star, and making the most money is number one on the call sheet for the series or film. And Shannen obviously was. And according to Shannen Doherty and Holly Marie Combs, Alyssa really wanted to be the number one and make more money. So Alyssa and Shannen were having all these issues. Holly was kind of in the middle because she was friends with both of them. And it got so bad that the network ended up bringing in a mediator, and Shannen and Holly didn't want to speak to the mediator. Alyssa did, and she also documented a lot of the issues that were going on set.
I just want to interject here to mention something I forgot to mention later, but it does make sense to add it in here so you have it for context for later. So one thing that was very famous about Charmed also, apart from all of these issues, was budgetary issues, especially in the later seasons. So Holly Marie Combs and Shannen Doherty have both spoken about, and I think Rose McGowan has too, about Alyssa Milano wanting more money. And I would be really surprised if she didn't get an increase when Shannon left the show. Obviously, I don't know if she did or not, but it would line up. These budget things very much will affect the rest of the show, the longevity of the show, other people on the show, and their income, because there is a lot of television executives, television networks that will take advantage of kids, teens, people in their 20s, people it's their first role in acting, because that's just the way a lot of these people work. Of course, everybody knows the very famous example of the Friends cast being kind of anti this and saying we are all the 6 stars, we all want to be paid the same, and they banded together, got themselves paid incredible money that it was the biggest show in the world, and they were making $1 million by the last couple of seasons. But there is also examples of this blowing up in people's faces, or kind of. Anyone from my original channel will probably already know this story, but I used to talk about the L word a lot over there. That's why there's a lot of L word Easter eggs in these videos. And this sort of thing happened to the L word cast back when the original show was on, around about this time too. That show was on Showtime, and it was the #1 show over there as well. And my friend Jess and I found this out like within the last 2 years, and this happened in about 2007. So originally the creator used to get a lot of stick because there was a character in season 3 that was like killed off out of nowhere, and everybody hated it. But really, what happened was Jennifer Beals, who was #1 the call sheet, a very experienced actor in her late 30s, she went to the rest of the cast who were in their 20s. It was their first acting job, like Kate Manning, who's Gwyneth Paltrow's cousin, Leisha Haley, and sort of told them, you need to band together so that you can get a raise. And that's what a lot of the younger cast did. The network said fine, but then turned around and said, okay, Eileen Chaikin, who's the creator, you need to kill one of them off right now, and that will show them that even though we're giving them this increase, they're all replaceable. And these are the type of people that you're dealing with. And then with Charmed, their kind of budget cast issues happened a lot later. I don't know, obviously, if Alyssa's money just increased when Shannon left or if it was every season, because she was the star, the #1, they wanted to retain her. And because they weren't increasing Charm's budget enough, or in the later seasons at all, and were taking money away, what happened was the other people on the show were affected. So you might not know this if you didn't watch it when it was airing, but there's storylines later in the show where Brian Krause's character, Leo, just becomes an elder and kind of disappears from the show for a while. That was purely for budget reasons. They wanted him out of a handful or even more in some seasons of episodes, so they didn't have to pay him for those episodes. And it's also why the character of Daryl kind of disappears a lot in the later seasons, because they were both main lead cast members appearing in the credits, and if they can restrict the number of episodes they're in, they don't have to pay them as much. So even though a lot of this is she said, there are larger things at play that can really affect people, because if they're cutting actors' money, they absolutely have already cut crew money and crew jobs. And obviously, I don't have evidence showing that, but it's never the first action to go and cut main cast member episodes for budget reasons.
Things continued to get worse, and also kind of adding a little bit more gas on the fire was the fact that at the time that all this was going on and they were having all these issues, Shannen was dating Julian McMahon, who was playing the character that Alyssa's character was with on the show, and then Alyssa was dating Brian Cruz, who was dating Holly's character on the show. So there was just a lot going on, and add in the fact that they're on this really big show. You know, they've been thrust into the spotlight and people are talking constantly about them, and the network's putting pressure on them, and they're shooting 20, 22, 23 episode seasons with long hours and, you know, just so many people and lots of pressure. So there was just a lot going on, and it seemed like it was a bit of a pressure cooker. Eventually, the network, according to Holly Marie Combs and Shannen Doherty, ended up being backed into a corner by Alyssa, who told them, I've been documenting all these issues, and if you do not choose between Shannen and I to continue with the show, then I am going to sue for a hostile work environment. And that was when the network and Spelling decided, we can't have her sue the production, you know, that will be an absolute nightmare. Spoilers for Charmed, spoilers for Charmed, the 20-year-old show. At the end of the third season, they ended up having Shannon's character perish and never return to the show. What they did was they didn't have someone come and replace her exact character, but Rose McGowan was introduced in the fourth season, and she was introduced as another sister, and the show continued on for 5 more seasons, and it ran for 8 seasons total. When Shannen was forced out of the show, Holly Marie Combs, who was only on the show because of Shannen, didn't want to continue. And according to Holly and Shannen, the network ended up basically forcing her and sounds like blackmailing her to continue on with the show. And I am pretty confident this is true because I have heard this since this happened, like back in 2000, I think the third season happened. Holly basically was told, if you leave this show, we will come for you financially. Whatever you do, we will come to garnish your wages to recoup what we will lose by you not being on the show. So she couldn't get another acting job or anything like that. They would just take that. And she even said to them, like, oh, well, what if I just go and like work in Walmart? And they said, no matter what role, what job, what career, we will come and garnish your wages. So in the intervening year since Charmed finished, it's also come out that Rose McGowan and Alyssa Milano had issues, and they have continued to have issues, especially when the Me Too movement was happening, with both of them very involved. And Rose accusing Alyssa Milano of kind of stealing the Me Too movement. There is so much other stuff to talk about with this show and all these other shows, especially like One Tree Hill, which I'm going to talk about in the last chapter, but I could honestly do a video on any of these shows alone. If that's something you'd want to see, let me know in the comments. I could also cover it over on my Patreon, which is launching on May 1st. It's linked in the description box if you want more videos, and I will talk about stuff over there that I can't talk about here. Sorry for that little interjection, but it's the only one you'll ever get because I don't do any sponsorships whatsoever at all, so it will only be me kindly asking to subscribe or check out my Patreon. But again, no pressure whatsoever. So back to Charmed. Rose McGowan, Alyssa Milano, you know, they're having these back and forth on social media a lot. But I would say over the last couple of years, there hasn't been too much between them. However,
at the end of last year, Holly Marie Combs went on Shannen Doherty's podcast, Let Me Be Clear, and they basically went over everything with Charmed. They talked about mainly everything that I've just gone over here, and they also discussed things like how the creator of the show, Constance, who was the only female writer, was basically pushed out after the first season, and she based the Charmed sisters on her own sisters, and she was really shut down. So after the podcast came out, a lot of people were talking about it online, and then kind of the convention season started after Christmas, and that is when things really started to heat up even more. And there was a convention in February in Orlando where the Friday Alyssa Milano was attending and doing like a Q&A panel as there normally is at these things. And then the next day there was Holly, Shannen, and Rose all appearing together doing a Q&A panel. So on the Friday, Alyssa used that moment to address it, which I do think them doing this at conventions is smart because, you know, they're surrounded by their fans. People upload it on a video, and I mean, it's a smart way to do it. So Alyssa basically said, I don't know what they're talking about. I didn't have any power to get rid of Shannen, and it was 20 years ago. Like, why are we talking about this, basically? And then the following day, Holly, Shannen, and Rose did their whole Q&A panel, and people asked questions and blah, blah, blah. And then at the very end, Shannen read out like a little statement she'd wrote, and Holly and Rose were there like supporting her. And basically she said, I mean, obviously I'm going to show you a clip of what she actually said, but she just said, this is the truth, and I want to get this off my chest, and this is what happened.
Holly and I, we were not me on the podcast, my podcast, let's be clear. In fact, we went in and we edited out anything that we felt would cause more drama. We simply told the truth because the truth actually does matter. But we wanted to try to save you, the fans, from heartbreak as much as humanly possible. At this point in my life, with my health diagnosis, I'm sorry if I start crying, with fighting horrific disease every day of my life, it is also incredibly important to me that the truth actually be told, as opposed to the narrative that others put out there for me.
After MegaCon in Orlando, there were some social media posting back and forth, which I'll put on the screen now, of course, but that's kind of where we are. There's not really a conclusion. I can't point and say definitively this is what happened, because they have left it kind of up in the air. They haven't done any more interviews or podcasts or anything about what's going on. And I am interested to see what happens over the spring and the summer, because there's a lot of conventions, and pretty much all of them are doing conventions pretty frequently. And I'm sure that there will be questions. At the minimum, there will be some little comments, I'm sure. And, you know, of course, people film all these things. So I'll be keeping an eye out for what happens. As I said, I'd love to go into more detail about Charmed or any of these shows, so let me know below. But I'm sure there's truth to kind of what everyone's saying. And I do think that Shannen didn't leave by her own volition, because why would she leave a hit show making all that money and being the lead? It doesn't make sense. And also, as I said, I've heard that thing about Holly for as far back as I can remember, that basically she was being held on the show. And overall, I think that there's just one thing that we can all be assured of when it comes to Charmed, and that will be that there will always be drama between this cast.
What do I attribute to based on how I've managed to stay out of the negative spotlight? I don't think anybody cares. The negative stuff that I do. Because I don't think I'm the type of actress that people are interested in following around. So I don't think anybody's really interested in the bad things that I'm doing. They're no worse than what you guys do. To be honest.
Smallville was another wildly successful WB series and was based around the high school years and early adulthood of Clark Kent as he transformed into the world's most famous superhero, Kryptonian Kal-El, also known as Superman. Smallville premiered on the WB on October 16th, 2001, breaking the ratings record for a premiere with 8.4 million viewers. The show was set in the fictional town of Smallville, Kansas, where a teenage Clark Kent is attending high school and coming to grips with his powers. Smallville ran for 10 seasons in total, with a large main cast across all of the seasons and a plethora of guest stars. Only 2 cast members, Tom Welling and Allison Mack, appeared as series regulars in all 10 seasons, although Mack did not appear in all of the episodes in season 10 for a very disturbing reason. During the first several seasons of Smallville, Allison Mack and fellow co-star Kristen Crook became friends, and while filming in Vancouver, Canada during the 5th season, Crook decided to take Mack to a group that she'd joined that was allegedly for self-improvement. On the advice of Kristen Crook, Allison Mack decided to join the self-improvement group, also known as NXIVM. NXIVM was founded in 1998 by Keith Raniere and Nancy Salzman. Nancy Salzman was a former psychiatric nurse, but purported herself to be vastly more educated and experienced. Raniere also claimed many things about himself that were not true. That he was a genius, that the FBI recognized him as a threat because he was so smart, that he was an accomplished pianist, and many other ludicrous things. Raniere had also previously founded a pyramid scheme called Consumers Byline that was shut down in the 1980s after being investigated by 25 states. New York State even issued him a $40,000 fine. In the 90s, he followed Consumers Byline by starting a vitamin pyramid scheme that also failed. Despite claiming he was a successful businessman who was a genius, Raniere was actually a very poor student and incredibly unaccomplished. The only thing that seemed he was good at was manipulating people. Time for some emotional support to speak about NXIVM. When Kristen Crook brought Mack into NXIVM, Raniere really rolled out the red carpet because he really wanted to bring in celebrities and people that had a high net worth and a lot of connections. So Mack was brought immediately to Raniere when really other people weren't allowed to meet him until they'd bought several very expensive courses. There is actually video footage of Mack meeting Raniere for the first time, and she does break down several times speaking to him, and he is just looking at her in an incredibly creepy way.
I'm used to that self-condemnation. I'm comfortable with that.
One thing that always stood out to me about this footage too is you can see that Mack is wearing a Smallville t-shirt. In case you don't know, like a lot of TV shows, when they're starting a new season, when they have a big episode like the 100th episode or, you know, other special things like that, the season premiere, the season finale, they will make special shirts for those things. And it's incredibly rare for actors to wear them, never mind the lead. And if you see Mack speaking about Smallville prior to being in NXIVM, she clearly loved being on the show and loved just everything about it. And it's so sad that by the end of the show that she was dropping down the amount of episodes she was appearing in because of NXIVM. But things get far, far worse, because when Mack entered NXIVM, you know, she began paying for all their expensive courses, and when she went in, she was again on Smallville earning tens of thousands of dollars every episode, and the show was one of those that had 20 plus episodes a season for 10 years. She also had a successful career as a child actor. Again, another That 70s Show little tie-in was that she appeared on the Disney Channel movie Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves, And that was one of the first projects that Mila Kunis ever was in. And Mack also used to audition against Kunis a lot. Kunis has spoken about Mack and finding out about NXIVM because, again, like they knew each other when they were kids. So I did put that in my That 70s Show cast video. If you wanted to see that, I'll link it in the cards above. So when Mack entered NXIVM, she had a fortune estimated north of $7 million. She also was very beloved within the Smallville community. She was going to Comic-Con and she was up for a lot of awards. Every year, nearly, she got nominated for a Teen Choice Award. She even won 2 back-to-back in 2006 and 2007. And she just seemed to have a lot of success, and a lot of people would have loved to have been in her position. By 2016, things could not be more different because Mack was actually fully reliant on NXIVM by this stage. She had completely stopped acting. Her last roles after Smallville, she was in multiple episodes in a recurring role in the Elijah Wood comedy Wilfred, where she played his love interest, and one of her last acting roles was in the Kevin Bacon show The Following, which was ironically about a cult. Mack was only working for NXIVM by 2016, and Raniere actually was withholding her payment because he wanted her to basically deliver other celebrities to NXIVM. And you can still today even go back to her Twitter and see her tweeting multiple celebrities like Kelly Clarkson and Emma Watson, people that she doesn't even know, asking them to join NXIVM. And because Raniere wasn't paying her, and also because she had spent so much money on all of these crazy expensive NXIVM courses, she basically was broke by 2016. And I've seen all the emails that she sent Raniere basically saying, I have no money, like I need to be paid for my NXIVM work. And he only paid her when she delivered India Oxenberg, who was someone that Raniere really wanted in the group. India Oxenberg is the daughter of Catherine Oxenberg, who was in the show Dynasty. And when India joined, she was kind of brought under the wing of Allison Mack. And around this time is when Mack started a group within NXIVM, a secret group called DOS. Mack basically was instructed by Raniere to bring in a number of high-ranking women within NXIVM that all fit a certain aesthetic that Raniere liked. So they all had to be good looking and under this very strict calorie control, and there was all sorts of other requirements.
She was kind of at her skinniest. She looked like her backbones were sticking out. But I confronted her and I said, I think you're sick. You're not eating, like there's a problem and you need to address it and start eating. She said, well, Keith is measuring my calories and he says, as long as I'm having my period, I'm fine.
Mack was told to induct all these women into this group DOS, and basically Raniere pretended that Mack was the head of it with some other high-ranking NXIVM women like Lauren Salzman, Nancy Salzman's daughter, and they were all supposed to have slaves underneath them. Like one of Allison Mack's slaves was India Oxenberg, and they all were then supposed to bring in their own slaves, and they had all these crazy requirements along with the calories. Like they had like 800 calories a day, and they also had to do all of the housework, do all these errands, do all these things. Like if they text them, they had to respond within 1 minute. They had to get up in the middle of the night and do drills and just all this other really strange stuff. But the ultimate goal of the group was to be slaves to Raniere. There is actually recorded evidence of Mack and Raniere having discussions about this group and what the requirements were, what they wanted to do. And one of the things that they forced the women to do when they were inducted into this group was to brand the women, which, according to multiple sources, was Allison Mack's idea. They branded the women with 7 strokes that were Keith Raniere's initials when you looked at it one way, and Allison Mack's when you looked at it another way.
January 9th, 6:59 a.m. talking about branding the wall.
Doing the actual brand in an orderly fashion, each of the 7 strokes having a certain ritualization. Each of the strokes has something that's said with them and maybe repeated after the stroke is done.
So like somebody says the thing while the stroke is being done, and then the person that's getting it done repeats it afterwards?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, you guys come up with something close to me.
Okay.
Well, because you've done it. So what would have been most meaningful, deep, surrendering, focusing for you?
I think it probably having it whispered in my ear and then me repeating it out loud. And then having it whispered in my ear and then me repeating it out loud.
Well, ask the others. It's not all you.
Well, I thought you were asking me.
Nice.
So you might hear that and think, why would anyone do this? Why wouldn't they just leave? Why would they continue with this? And it's because in the beginning, when Mack was bringing the women in, or the other people were bringing women in under Mack's instructions, before they told them anything or told them any of like the crazy stuff, they basically said, oh, this is a women's empowerment group within NXIVM. It's like special invite only, and made the women turn over collateral before they told them anything else. And the collateral that these people gave was wild. Like, it would be crazy made up stories about their partner doing horrendous things to them or their kids, or it was actual like real stuff like naked pictures and just stuff that you would not want getting out about you. And it was agreed upon that they turned this over, and if they told anyone about DOS or didn't do as they were told, that this information would be released. In 2017, Sarah Edmondson, who was a member of DOS, spoke out to the New York Times about what was happening in DOS, what was happening inside NXIVM, and Keith Raniere and Allison Mack and what they were doing. Sarah was a high-ranking NXIVM employee. She actually owned and operated the Canadian location in Vancouver. She was a former actress herself and also good friends with Allison Mack. When she was inducted into DOS, she was tied down and held down by other women and branded by a doctor that was in NXIVM. And she photographed her brand and let the New York Times run her story with her name, her picture, and also a photo of her brand, pointing out Raniere and Mack's initials. Also featured in the New York Times article were other high-ranking NXIVM members who had left over finding out about what was happening with DOS. One was director Mark Vincente and his wife Bonnie. Bonnie is actually an actor as well, and she's appeared in the Star Wars universe multiple times. She plays Luke's aunt in Star Wars projects, and Bonnie was actually recruited for DOS, but when they started telling her about it, she was like, no. And she had actually left NXIVM before Mark and was showing him the light. And then when Mark left, he had been in NXIVM for a very long time and was very close to Raniere. And so between Sarah and also Sarah's husband, Nippy, Mark, and Bonnie, they all were able to provide the New York Times with a lot of damning information, evidence, proof about what NXIVM was doing and how awful Raniere, Nancy Salzman, and Allison Mack were, and also Nancy's daughter, Lauren, because pretty much DOS was being ran by Raniere, Allison Mack, and Lauren Salzman. With the exception of Seventh Heaven, every show that I'm talking about today, I was a huge fan of. I still am to this day. I loved all these shows. I still do. I watch them all the time. Like I said, I have a Buffy tattoo. I've pretty much met like most of the people that I'm talking about in this video too. And I'll put pictures up. Again, this was like the late 90s, early 2000s. So I used to collect autographs. So when I met a lot of them, I had a disposable camera. So I took a picture with a lot of the people that I'll put up, but some of the people, it was an autograph I got because it just, we didn't have iPhones with like 4K cameras on them then. But I say all that because I remember when this New York Times article came out was when I was living in New Jersey, and I was a really big fan of Allison Mack. Like, she was probably my favorite person on Smallville, along with Tom Welling, obviously. Like, really liked him and his character as well. I remember being so shocked. My youngest sister loves all these shows too. That was like a big, like, we used to watch them together. And I remember texting her and sending her the article. And at first I was like, this has to be bullshit. Like, this isn't true. Like, there's no way. And I remember like just keep finding other people talking about it, and I couldn't believe it. And obviously, like, the New York Times, it's not like it's some theory on an anonymous message board. And I honestly could not believe what I was reading. But in the wake of the article coming out, Raniere, Mack, and his inner circle, they ended up fleeing to Mexico. Mack and Klein and a number of other people went with Raniere to Mexico, and this is when the FBI and Mexican authorities caught up with him, and Raniere was actually arrested. And this amazing genius was actually found hiding in a closet. And when they arrested him, there's actually video of Mack basically watching him be put in the police car and being driven away, and her and Nikki Klein and the other people are like following and looking devastated.
Let's go in the car. We're gonna follow them. Get out of the way. Lauren's coming. Let's go, you guys.
When this happened in January 2018, even though Mack, Lauren Salzman, and other NXIVM higher-ups were there when Raniere was arrested, they weren't arrested there in Mexico at this $10,000 a night luxury villa, but they were arrested 2 months later. Over the next year, Mack was in plea negotiations, and although in the beginning she stood by Raniere, she seemed to finally realize what she had done. Mack was facing a minimum of 15 years in prison and a maximum of life. Because she was under arrest, she obviously couldn't go and do certain things, so she asked India Oxenberg to go up to her home in New York and to clear it out and pack up some stuff and put it in a storage unit for her. I'm sure she absolutely regrets this decision, because this is when India was able to discover a treasure trove of evidence and documentation for all of the heinous things that Mack and Raniere did. This is where all of the voice recordings come from, lots of documentation, videos, just so much evidence for these horrible crimes. In April 2019, Mack pleaded guilty to racketeering and racketeering conspiracy charges and admitted to state law extortion and forced labor. Under advisory sentencing guidelines, Mack was facing 14 to 17 and a half years behind bars. Days before her sentencing, Mack released a statement saying that her NXIVM involvement was the biggest mistake and the greatest regret of her life. On June 30th, 2021, Mack was sentenced to 3 years in prison and 3 years probation with 1,000 hours of community service and a $20,000 fine. On September 13th of the same year, 2021, Mack reported early to her prison sentence at the Federal Correctional Institute in Dublin, California. Mack was released 14 months early after serving less than 2 years of her original sentence. She's currently serving the 3 years of probation and wearing an ankle monitor and residing at her parents' house in Los Angeles, California. Apparently, in 2020, before she went into prison to serve her sentence, she was taking classes at UCLA. Now, you may hear this and think, oh, a cult. That must be like a one-off, but apparently not when it comes to the WB. There actually was another cult and another young actress that was on a very successful WB show that almost ran for a decade. And while she was making the show, she was also deeply involved in this cult. And when I was originally making this video, that was what we were going to talk about next, along with all of the other predatory behavior that was going on the set of One Tree Hill, because one of their cast members was also in a cult when she was on the show. But I'm going to be saving that for a separate video, because in the process of making this video, I had several sources come to me when I was almost done with the video and reveal a lot of things that are not out publicly about a WB star who was on probably its most successful show. Certainly the biggest show in my opinion, and I think it is the show today that is still popular and is still bringing in new audiences. And we have so much to discuss in this next chapter. There is a little bit of jumping around because I was getting information every which way and at different times from different people. So really strap in for this one, because we're going to be discussing information that's not out publicly, things behind the scenes, stuff with cast members, people having fights, and somehow it all culminates in an appearance in the Grey's Anatomy universe. So let's get into the next chapter, where we will discuss one of the stars of one of the most famous shows of all time, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I will say that if this video does okay, I am a little bit worried about whether it is going to do okay or not, but if it does okay, I would love to do like a CW follow-up. There's so many other shows that had stuff like this going on, Supernatural and loads of them. So if that's something you want to see, either a One Tree Hill standalone video or a CW follow-up, let me know in the comments. But we're going to get into this chapter now, and I normally, I'm not someone that loves to throw trigger warnings for everything, but this section is going to talk about very difficult topics, very difficult. I also want to be clear, this applies to all my videos, this entire video, but especially this chapter, that everything in this chapter, apart from the black and white arrest records and my own personal experiences with this person when I was 15 and 16 years old, everything else in the video is alleged and allegations, because a lot of the people I spoke to are ex-girlfriends, ex-managers, convention hosts and fans, and just regular people that have told me these things, and that is what I'm sharing. So let's get into everything. So in this final chapter, we're going to be discussing one of the main stars of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, who was on the show for the entire 7 seasons and was in every single episode except one. And that is Nicholas Brendon, who played the character of one of Buffy's best friends, Xander Harris. Nikki Brendon is also a twin. His twin brother Kelly appeared in the episode The Replacement in season 5. Nikki also went on to have a recurring role on Criminal Minds. He was on the show for 21 episodes between 2007 and 2014. A lot of people would also know him from the show Private Practice, which is a Grey's Anatomy spin-off. So Nikki has had a lot of highly publicized and documented troubles with addiction and with the law. He has been, to my knowledge, arrested 14 times, and these are for a plethora of different charges. Primarily, they have been for domestic violence. And he has also had a lot of charges for things like prescription fraud. There's also a lot of documented situations where he has become intoxicated and then he has destroyed property, primarily hotel rooms and Airbnbs. But there are a lot more cases of this that just haven't been made public. He actually was on the Dr. Phil show to try and get help for depression, and he also was on the show talking about depression and dealing with it. But Dr. Phil basically confronted him about him smelling like alcohol and having substance abuse issues, and he ended up walking out because he didn't want to discuss that. And Dr. Phil was saying, you can't come on and offer people help with like depression when you are having all these other issues. I'm not saying Dr. Phil is some wonderful person, but he ended up having Nikki back on the show. And I do think a lot of the misinformation out there about how he has gone to rehab, he is in recovery, and he's completely, everything is solved, and he hasn't had any further issues with girlfriends or with the law. I think that a lot of the misinformation comes from that, because he did come back to Dr. Phil's show and, spoke to him about this and needing help and all of that. And I think a lot of people probably saw that and then think, oh, okay, he's gone and got help and everything's fine now. But that is, in my opinion, not the case. So I want to provide every bit of context I possibly can. And Nikki has been open about the fact that when he was younger, he himself was a victim of SA. So that is something that he does talk about a lot, and obviously that has a huge impact on someone. If you go back and look at interviews, especially from the lead actresses of Buffy, and they're asked about who they like working with the most, or who, is the most fun on set, all the time, most of them say Nikki. And a lot of them have gone on to say, he's so nice. And I heard a lot of people say that. A lot of people said that they enjoyed working with him back then. And the only person that I know did have an issue with him back then was David Boreanaz. And they didn't have a problem in the beginning, I believe, but they did after about season 2, season 3. And obviously after season 3, David Boreanaz went on to Angel, so they didn't have to work together anymore. But I did hear about an incident between the two of them at some sort of publicity event for the WB in Canada. I was told this happened, where they got into an altercation, and allegedly David Boreanaz punched him, and allegedly Joshua Jackson had to pull Boreanaz off Nicholas Brendon. There is more to this story, but it gets into the very personal lives of other cast members, mainly Sarah Michelle Gellar, and I don't think that's necessarily fair, because I try to stick to only discussing because in my videos, I try to stick to only discussing people who have behaved horrendously, are doing something criminal, are hurting other people, etc. It appears they never made up, because there was a People magazine 20-year Buffy reunion in 2017, and I'm sure a lot of big Buffy fans know this, but they obviously invited all of the cast back. They did this big photo shoot. They did this video. It's on YouTube. I've linked it below in the sources if you want to go watch it, and I'll put clips in here so you can see what I'm talking about. But
when they are doing the video part, they're all sitting in this like semicircle in chairs. And then when you see the picture, like the picture of the 20-year reunion, you see all the cast. But Nikki isn't in one of the chairs talking, and they kind of insert these clips of him and Emma Caulfield talking, and that's like the only time you see him on video. And that was because, allegedly, David Boreanaz said he would not do the People 20-year reunion if Nicholas Brendon was there. And according to his girlfriend at the time, now ex-girlfriend, Nick was asked very late to join the People reunion. When he turned up, everyone else was leaving, and they told him, obviously not David, like the other cast told him, oh, we were told your flight was delayed. And then he went in and did, the bit that you see, and they photoshopped him into the image.
I'm very close to finishing the video, but I just found this picture, and it does line up with what the ex-girlfriends were saying. This isn't a professional picture. This is just somebody snapping a group picture as the other people are leaving. Obviously, Emma Caulfield was going to stay because she was in the video with him. And I'll just say that if I had to guess who would be in this picture and who would be absent from this picture, this makes sense. This was in 2017. This picture would be very different today, not just because of Nikki, but also, as we learned earlier in the video, because of Joss.
But I was told that allegedly Emma Caulfield does not speak to him anymore. There was an incident at a convention in Paris in 2019, and that was the severing of their relationship. So according to ex-girlfriends, when Nikki was working on Buffy is when his substance use started to escalate. He started drinking, allegedly, a pint of tequila on the way home from filming, and he would drink it like while he was driving. That then escalated into a white powdered substance. And there also was a time period, it was more like season 2, season 3, where there was steroid use. And after his nose was broken, apparently he couldn't use the white substance anymore. So that is when he started moving into things like painkillers and also sleeping tablets. So he started mixing those with alcohol. And you will see in the arrest records a lot of that happening. There are a lot of arrests that happened while he was consuming this cocktail of substances. And he has also himself said on Dr. Phil and numerous other places that when he would take all of these substances, that he basically would black out. And there was a lot of times that he would wake up in jail and not know like why he was there. He has destroyed a lot of hotel rooms, apartments, Airbnbs, and a lot of like the news reports and articles that were written, and some of this is in like the actual arrest record, like statements and things, that his room would be destroyed, and then he would also have like urinated on himself and other things like that. And the ex-girlfriends I spoke to also talked about property damage and other things that he'd done, and some of them even showed me like physically when we were on the phone what had happened and the result of things. And it absolutely was those places, because there's videos on his Facebook and on his YouTube that he is physically sitting in the house, because when they've shown me on the phone, like on FaceTime, it's identical. I know it's the same place. There's a lot of stuff like that, that things that they told me, I was able to match it up to stuff that was publicly available. And there are little things that I will like put on the screen and stuff, like pictures, for example. It's not any huge amount or pictures of anything crazy. And I'm including those images because it does show you that they did have access, because you won't be able to just pull up this picture of Alexis Denisov and Nikki, where Alexis is making a fan out of all the money he's made from taking pictures with his fans. And Nikki is like, it looks like trying to like breastfeed from him. Like, it's weird because obviously this picture doesn't prove anything apart from like, it's a weird picture, but it is just, again, showing you that these people exist and they did have this access not only to Nikki like as a boyfriend, but the other stars. And and it's not just Buffy people either. Like, I am talking about pretty much everybody that I've spoken about in this video, because Nicholas Brendon stayed with his friend Nikki Klein and her wife Allison Mack at Allison Mack's house. And I'm not talking about like, oh, they stayed together in 2001. Like, this happened in 2018. Full-blown nxivm sex cult sex slave timeline. So it's just all connected, all of them. And they still to this day, people that I have mentioned in this video a few weeks ago were telling fans, oh, Nikki Brendon, I love him. And I know some people might say, well, maybe they don't know, but they know. Everyone knows. It's impossible not to know.
So I want to talk about the conventions now because there are so many aspects to this. The first very brief thing is the fact that these conventions are where a lot of the former Buffy cast members and other WB cast members socialize with Nikki. As I mentioned earlier, one of the lead actresses from a WB show that I mentioned by name earlier in the video was telling fans 2 months ago, he's this amazing guy. However, I will say, with the exception of that actress and maybe one or two others, the ex-girlfriends told me that Nikki reaches out a lot to the former Buffy cast members and other WB actors, and he is ignored. This is all after the last string of arrests, and of course, most of those arrests were for attacking his girlfriends, so it seems they do not want to be involved in any way due to these arrests. And also they hold a lot of weight with their fans, because if those fans see pictures of them hanging out with Nikki, you constantly see people online saying, oh, well, he must be fine, he must be doing good because so-and-so's with him. But the most important point in regards to these conventions and the convention organizers, these conventions are where Nikki has a huge amount of access to people and fans. And nearly all of his girlfriends were fans of Buffy that went to a convention. He was charming and charismatic, and that is how they got sucked into his orbit. Additionally, a lot of his arrests have taken place at conventions, and in a second we'll get into exactly why a lot of these ex-girlfriends think that the conventions are just the perfect storm for him to fly off the handle. And we are going to discuss stuff in this section that isn't out publicly. Now, he hasn't been at conventions in the last few years. Obviously, there was the pandemic, and he did have spinal surgery, but that didn't stop him, because I've heard different stories of him with his cane attacking people. I know a lot of conventions were getting a lot of pushback if they were going to have him. I believe, allegedly, this happened with WizardCon. He was upset that he wasn't being invited to this WizardCon, and he went and spoke to one of the organizers of it, and basically was like, oh, everything's fine, I'm better, I'm fine. He is a charismatic guy. So they were like, okay. And also they know that, one, he was like a main lead character, and they know because of all these issues that they can undercut him, because he will take what he can get, basically money-wise. So normally, how conventions work is that a lot of them will have a basic bare minimum level. He would take sometimes $2,000 and $3,000 for the day of taking pictures and autographs and stuff, because he needed money. And I know some people might think, oh, he hasn't been able to work in years. Of course he needs money. But the thing is, Buffy is an absolute monster of a show. It just sold to Disney Plus, the reruns constantly, DVDs, all of this stuff.
And while most shows now, like, residuals aren't that great, streaming networks, like, you really don't get anything from those.
But a super successful show like Buffy, the cast still get
a lot of residuals. And I'm going to give you exact numbers, how much, because he consistently gets Buffy residual checks a couple of times a year for 40 to 50,000
total.
And the year that the 20th anniversary happened, he was getting like $90,000, because obviously, like, with the anniversary, like, they were talking about a lot. There was lots of specials and things like that, and people were doing rewatches, and it's not like that is everything too. Like, he was on Criminal Minds for a long time. And of course, there's other little things, like he gets small amounts from, like, there was I think it was a Lifetime movie that he did with Carpenter and stuff. Those are little checks. It is primarily Buffy, so it's not like the conventions are the only thing.
Editing Ash here, I forgot to mention something. One of the ex-girlfriends told me that he allegedly, according to them, owes over $100,000 to the IRS in unpaid taxes from his residuals. A lot of those websites online will say, oh, he has a $6-7 million fortune, but there is nothing left of any of his acting money. There's no savings, according to the girlfriend, and he no longer owns any property. He doesn't really have any assets at all. There was a bunch of other stuff that she went into in detail about the finances and stuff, but there's just so much other stuff to talk about that's, like, more important, so that could be maybe for another time.
To go back to WizardCon, the story, the guy that Nikki was speaking to and trying to get himself back in, the guy basically is like, okay, you can come to the next one, but will you do me a favor for today? Obviously the convention's going on, that's why he was upset he wasn't there. And he was like, okay, like, what is it? And the guy starts telling him about this, like, evening with the vampires. I don't know exactly what it was called, but it was basically this event within WizardCon that was supposed to be in the evening with the Vampire Diaries main guys. And allegedly, they did not want to do it. So the convention was like, fuck, what are we going to do? So they asked Nikki, who was on a vampire show, and he said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. But the only thing I want is let my girlfriend come in and, like, meet the people she wants to meet, basically. Because, again, mostly dates younger women who are fans. So he went and stood in for the Vampire Diaries cast as, like, a surprise guest. And his girlfriend went in, met the people she wanted to meet. Then WizardCon did have him back. So after the February WizardCon, they did not have him back, which most people who I've spoke to believe that this is because in 2019 there was a highly publicized arrest.
Sorry, I'm interjecting again, but I just want to make sure everything is right and I've included everything. So I'm just going to quickly run through basically an arrest timeline and mention some of the other relationships that I haven't mentioned yet. Obviously, this isn't every single arrest because I've mentioned the others in the rest of the video, same with the relationships. So we're going to start in 2006. And this is when he was dating a 22-year-old woman and he was 35. He keeps getting older, but his girlfriends keep getting younger or staying the same age. So I haven't spoken to this woman personally, but I've read her story. We're in some groups together, and she has detailed many physical attacks that happened to her, and one of them was at Nikki Brendon's brother's wedding. He has two brothers and his twin brother. He ended up slamming this woman's head into a marble shower so badly that she has a permanent dent in her head. She also mentioned strangulation many times, and you'll see that pattern continue throughout the rest of the video. They broke up in 2009, and in 2010, he was arrested by the LAPD. He actually had to be stun-gunned, tased, because he was intoxicated. That's what they were originally arresting him for. And he was arrested also for felony vandalism. He was later charged with 4 misdemeanors, one for resisting arrest, 2 counts of battery against police officers, and 1 count of vandalism. He ended up just getting probation. 2014, in October, he went to a convention, Tree City Comic-Con, and this was in Idaho. He ended up being arrested for a misdemeanor of malicious injury to property and for, again, resisting arrest. He later issued a public apology for this, saying that this all happened because he had consumed alcohol and pain medication. This was the year he ended up being let go from Criminal Minds, and according to ex-girlfriends, he was let go from the show over all of his arrests and legal issues. In 2014, he got married to, I believe, his second wife, and 5 months later, in February 2015, they got divorced. Also in February 2015, he ended up being arrested again, and this was over him trashing a hotel room in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The next month, in March 2015, he was arrested again in Florida, again over hotel smashing, causing water damage, etc. Then in May 2015, 2 months later, he was arrested again, this time in South Carolina, and it was intoxication and impairment. In June, the next month, he entered rehab, and in October 2015, I believe this is when he was filming Dr. Phil, that he was arrested in New York, again, when he was filming, and this was for felony third-degree robbery, mischief, and for strangulation of his girlfriend at the time. He was charged with 2 counts of criminal mischief, 1 count of obstruction of breathing, and a felony charge for the robbery. This 2015 incident, I believe, is the incident that there are CCTV images available of him carrying out this attack. He is dragging the woman by her hair in the street outside this hotel bar, and you can see this in these images. They're very blurry, obviously they're CCTV, and after the incident had happened, he also went on to physically injure himself and threaten his own life. In 2017, he was arrested for attacking a different girlfriend. This was in Palm Springs, California, and the girlfriend at the time actually had an active protective order in New York and Florida against him. Even though this happened in 2017, he wasn't charged with this until May 2019, and in all that time, he was still going to many other conventions. So in April 2019, he was charged with felony corporal injury to a spouse, and he accepted a plea deal for this, receiving just 3 years of probation and 20 hours of community service. In 2019, he was dating one of the women who spoke to me, and this woman is being extremely brave and is actually letting me use her name. So I will speak about her at the very end of the video, and I'll also provide links in the sources to all of her social media where she is speaking out and telling her story. So if you want to go and check her out, and stay to the end to find everything out about that. I spoke to this woman extensively, and she echoed what we've heard countless times throughout this video from the other girlfriends about physical attacks and strangulation. In 2021, he was arrested again, and this arrest was quite highly publicized. It was reported by a lot of media outlets, and his mugshot was circulated a lot. And he was arrested for prescription fraud. This was in Idaho. He was pulled over by police, and he was also charged with not identifying himself because he gave them his brother's misspelled license. And when they found prescription bottles, they were in other people's names. This was all for Adderall and other generic versions. And many of the ex-girlfriends told me about his substance abuse with Adderall. He, according to them, gets a lot of prescriptions in other people's names. And according to an ex-girlfriend, when they were on tour in the UK, he actually had someone fly from the UK to the US to fill their prescription, and then get straight back on the plane because he had ran out of pills when he was in the UK. With all of his arrests being so public and for what they were, which was violently attacking women, there were a lot of Buffy fans that spoke out when he would be booked for conventions. So this was at Lexington Comic-Con in 2019. And again, this is according to his ex-girlfriend and is alleged. They got so much pushback about him coming to this event that the city had to get involved with him coming and being there because of all the stuff that he's done. So the city and the ex-girlfriend couldn't remember why this plan was made, but it was basically that he was only allowed to be there Saturday and Sunday, and he then had to do this deal that the convention basically offered to him. And it was that he would have to donate a portion of his fee to a charity. And the convention in the beginning said it needs to be a charity that's going to benefit domestic violence. He then came back and said, no, I don't want it to be for domestic violence. I want it to be for mental health. He was going to donate 25% of his fee, and the convention was going to match it. So it would be like kind of 50% of his fee, even though the convention was putting in the other 25%. And according to his ex-girlfriend, allegedly, there was no charity that was given this money. It was only something that they said. Didn't have to provide the convention any documentation. As far as anyone has told me, nobody thinks this actually happened, because I think the convention was like, do this, donate 25% of your fee, but never followed up. I don't know if they donated their fee. The ex-girlfriend said she didn't think so, but obviously, you know, I haven't checked every single mental health charity ever. They certainly haven't provided any documentation. Neither has Nicholas Brendon. After the conventions were kind of drying up, he started doing like these little events that were just him, like doing a bowling night, doing a karaoke night, and it would be him and like a handful of fans, because he was drinking and all of that. And sometimes, if not very many people showed up, really attacked his ego. And according to a lot of the girlfriends, that is why he would like fly off the handle a lot of the times at conventions, because he would compare like his line to like someone else's line, and how many people that were coming to him for a picture and how many people were going to this person. Apparently with these like smaller events, like it's only a handful of people, so they're right there seeing everything. And he sometimes would start getting like aggressive with the girlfriends. People would make comments. They were worried or concerned about the girlfriend because they were seeing how he was behaving. And there was also people at these conventions, people who ran these conventions, and even just fans that would say, oh, he would ask for more money, or he would ask for this. And basically they gave in because they were afraid of what he would do to the girlfriends because of the way he was behaving and speaking to them. So now I'm going to explain my experiences with Nicky Brendon and also the Grey's Anatomy private practice story that I alluded to in the beginning of this chapter. So I first met Nicky Brendon in August 2003, the year before I moved to America. And this took place in Brighton, England. And I met him a few more times, the last one being May, I'll put it on the screen, 2004, at a Star Fury event called Fusion in Blackpool. So I ended up going to this event that was called the David Boreanaz event. And to sum it up, David Boreanaz left a lot to be desired, because he was supposed to come to the event, do a big like walk around, meet the people that had purchased photos and autographs do a VIP lunch event where all of the cast would like walk around the different tables. There was 150 people who purchased tickets. I believe that was the number, if memory serves. And then he was also supposed to do like a Q&A panel on stage. And he didn't want to do the vast majority of that. So he took the pictures and gave the autographs that people had paid for. The people who purchased the VIP tickets, he didn't want to do the VIP thing at all. He let those people, I had one of the VIP tickets, take a second picture with him, and it just in like a different setting, like he was standing up. So that was it. And he got helicoptered in and helicoptered out. And the rest of the guests were Nikki Brendon, his twin brother Kelly Donovan, and Mark Lutz, who was on Angel. They absolutely made the convention. Nikki Brendon was the hero of the event because he just made people so happy. He remembered everyone's name. He was so nice and charming, and all my experiences with him were nothing but amazing. Again, these are over 20 years ago now. So when I left the event, had a great time, I went next door to my hotel and I was sitting in the bar with my aunt and my cousin, and Nikki, Kelly, and Kelly's girlfriend at the time, Stacey Scowley, who was in a few episodes of Buffy season 7, they ended up coming in and sitting down in the bar. I am a very if you don't ask, you don't get, and the worst someone can say is no type of person. So I went over, reintroduced myself and said, I just want to say thank you so much for such a great day, blah, 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 blah. And they were like, oh, sit with us, sit with us. So I sat with them, and a few times I was like, I'm going to leave you alone, I'm going to leave you alone. And they were like, no, stay. And I ended up staying about 6 hours with them way into the night. And although I have had hundreds of amazing experiences with celebrities, I did my first ever movie with Julie Andrews, and I've done stuff with Nev Campbell, I've done stuff with all the L Word cast, like there's hundreds of people that I've met. But for many, many years, I would always say when someone asked me, what was the best experience you've ever had with a celebrity? And that was normally my answer, because they were nothing but wonderful to me. So that 1st of May, and I'm still adding context to this video, but obviously when I'm talking about this event, I'm working off a 20-year-old memory, so I didn't want to say some of the things that I wasn't too sure if I was like misremembering. So when I've been editing and trying to find articles to like show you guys on the screen obviously what I'm talking about, I found this post from this woman who also attended, and she was there every day, and she goes into a lot of detail, and it does confirm my memory that this event was an absolute shit show, and it was such a disaster. There was so many things, and that's why I said Nikki was like the hero of it, because even there's articles written about this event, and it even talks about how he was signing like hours after everybody else, like signing autographs, and there's a lot of other stuff. I obviously will link this post in the sourcing, but it is a fascinating rabbit hole if you want to look into it. Like even the last day of the event, all of the volunteers and like stewards resigned over everything that was happening, and it was just a mess. But yeah, I couldn't remember whether this was true or not, but it was. And when the regular like ticketed people were going to see David, like they weren't allowed to speak to him, they weren't allowed to, I mean, like hugging, kissing, like I kind of understand that, like, you know, that's just, I wouldn't be like that. I'm obviously not a celebrity, but I know there are some that are like that, and it's a really interesting read if you want to check it out. But that's just a little bit of additional context. So that all happened in August 2003, just after Buffy had finished. We're now going to jump forward to 2010 when he was on Criminal Minds, and he ended up being cast on Private Practice, the Grey's Anatomy spinoff. And he was cast in that show in 2010, even though all these things were starting, there was arrests, everything like that. The reason that he was cast on that show is because when they were writing the character that he ended up playing, which was a character who was a rapist, The writers wanted to cast someone who was the last person in the world that you would think would do something like that. And they ended up coming up with Xander Harris from Buffy the Vampire Slayer is the last person you would think would do that. And apparently Shonda Rhimes personally called him to ask him to be on the show. And that story about him being cast on Private Practice just shows you what a beloved character he played. He is a very charismatic person who was on a wildly popular show that people care deeply about. And all of that buys him such goodwill with people, but it also gives him access to legions of fans, many of whom are young women who get taken in by him and then think they can help him. But unfortunately, these women suffer greatly at his hand. I've heard over the years about some of the legal issues and some of the substance abuse, but as soon as I started looking into all of this for the video, researching and finding more and more, and then reaching out to all of these people who've had various types of relationships with him and learning what really was going on, that's why as soon as I learned everything and all of this, it was important to me, and more so to his former victims, that we get this information out there as soon as we could, in hopes that there wouldn't be any more victims of Nicholas Brendon. One of the very, very brave women who spoke to me has started to speak out on social media, and she is okay with being named. Her name is Sarah Allison, and I will link her social media and everything down below in the sources. Go and check out her content on TikTok. She talks a lot about her story. If you made it to the end of this video, I absolutely adore you. This video started off very different, and then when I was halfway done with it, more than halfway, and the sources started coming in, it morphed into something else. It has been the most work by far. I am a one woman and a one cat operation here, so that's why it's me hopping in and edits and things like that, because I don't have some big research team or anyone but a cat behind me. So thank you if you watched all of this. Please leave MVP below so I can personally thank you, because you're awesome. And I will also put all my social media, Miss Gloria's social media. Also down there will be my Patreon, which is launching this month. And if you want more content, let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much again for watching this video. And as always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Are you ready? Are you ready for your close-up? You're looking beautiful. You look beautiful. Oh, you always look beautiful, but you look extra beautiful now. Okay, to turn the camera off now. Loves nothing more than to be on my shoulder, honestly.